Okay, welcome to this video. I hope you are having a good morning without me. Um, in this video, we're going to do an introduction to racism in the classroom, stages of multicultural education, and then we're going to introduce the critical discussion. So first up, a quote from today from Janet Mock. I mentioned this book in class. Um, and the quote is this: "Though we came from our native Hawaiian mother, Chad and I were perceived and therefore raised as black, which widely cast us as outsiders, non-locals, and being seen as local in Hawaii was currency. When we first returned to Oahu, we spoke with a Texas twang that also got us teased. Chad has strong emotions surrounding those first few months. He was traumatized by his apparent blackness, which was non-event in Dallas and Oakland, where we were among many black kids. In Hawaii, we were some of the few mixed black kids around, and both our parents taught us that because the world would perceive us as black, we were black." And this is an interesting thing because it's one of the issues that she struggles with through the book is this identity of conceptually viewing herself as native Hawaiian, but also being viewed as an outsider and a black person. So it's that idea, even, when we talk about the Jim Crow laws, when we talk about all that stuff, that blackness is this very malleable idea, and there are even gradations of it. So some people are more black than others based on different characteristics. And it's something to kind of be aware of, it's something to kind of think about. So first up, I want to talk about racism in the classroom. Now I want you to pause the video and look at these pictures and tell me what you notice about these pictures. Okay, I trust you've paused and looked at each of the pictures individually. Um, but notice this. All of the pictures except for one are stocked staged images set up for this purpose, um, except for this one. And you see it's an honest-to-goodness classroom with the student actually doing work. If we look back at all of these other pictures, um, in some of the pictures, if the students have pencils, their pencils aren't actually doing anything. Um, the teachers are pointing at random things on the chalkboard and not looking at the chalkboard. You'll see the one picture where all the students have their hands up, and just all these different things are happening in these pictures that are not usual classroom happenings. So you can tell they're really just staged, again, except for this one. Um, it's interesting to me that when you try and find people of color in educational settings, that you get a lot of stock photos and maybe a couple of women teachers. You almost never find men as teachers in the classroom, African men. And I think that's something that's interesting and needs to be kind of explored. But beyond just the teacher aspect of it, we need to think about the students in the classroom. Um, and typically minority students are either better or worse than who, right? Clearly it's the Caucasian students are the ideal student, and then you get the Asian students who are smart. But what does Asian mean? Does Asian mean Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Micronesian, Polynesian? I mean, you've got all of these different categories of quote unquote Asian, and they're all supposed to be smart. Um, I don't know how true that holds. Then you have the stereotype that Latino students are not as diligent. And again, we're asking the question, Mexican, El Salvadorian, Panamanian, and that even again, if we're talking about Mexican students, are they from the rural regions of Mexico or are they from Mexico City? Mexico City has very strong educational standards, and the students there are very engaged. A good friend of mine was born and raised in Mexico City, and he is an engineer. that helped to bring the new Fiat to the United States. He was part of the engineering team that made the engine legal to run in the United States. So the story here is this: students are students. Just drop the prejudice before you teach and don't let it come back. You're going to have influxes of students from poor communities, and those influx of students from poor communities are all going to be different students. You know, you might get an influx of students from a largely Mexican community, and you might say, all these students are all blah, blah, blah. Resist that urge. Make sure you just focus on students or students. Help each student to learn and don't clump them in a category. You're going to hear some pretty horrible things when you get in the field. Make sure you ignore them. Okay, but you know, how do we, if we're treating students as students and we don't want to say, okay, that's a black student, that's an Asian student, that's a Mexican student, that's a Native American student, how do we deal with issues of race in the classroom? How do we discuss them? Well, we can look historically at things is one way, and we're going to talk about Banks' stages of multicultural education as well. But the racial issues to discuss in the classroom, we can talk about Native American issues. What did the United States do to Native Americans? And it's not to downplay, but it's to open up doors to discuss more things. Japanese internment camps, same story here. At one point in time during World War II, we said, oh, you're Japanese, we're going to lock you away because you're Japanese. Even though you're third, fourth generation Japanese and you don't speak Japanese, we're going to lock you away because you look different. Then we're looking at POW camps like Camp Perry in Ohio, which is up towards Cleveland. Um, you have, that was a very loose geographic description, but you have all of these Italians and Germans, I think it is, who are being locked away in these POW camps, and then after that time expires, a lot of the people are just kind of released into the community. So what's going on? I mean, there's clearly some ethnic and cultural conflicts going on in that world. Um, then we talk about sundown towns in the Midwest. Don't let the sun set on your, black behind, although much less polite than that. And there are arguments that sundown towns still exist in the Midwest. We have areas and communities of almost no ethnic diversity, just very homogeneous, white people owning the town and controlling the town, and different techniques of keeping that as a Caucasian only. Then we have continued segregation. When I lived in the rural South, there was a line, there was a road, and on one side of the road is all where all the black people lived, and on the other side of the road is where all of the rich people lived. And it was really, really strange. And these roads didn't connect across the way like you would imagine they should. You had to go to a main road, and then that main road would connect to the other side of town. And then finally, the ignorance of contributions of non-whites to the development of the country. I mean, sure, we have our little tokens and things, and we have our stories that reinforce our stereotypes, like the Chinese Americans who helped to build the railroad. But what is the value of these contributions? Are we actually valuing people's contributions, or are we just kind of doing tokenism? Which brings us to Banks' stages of multicultural education. And we have these four levels, and we're looking at it. The first one is the contribution approach, and I call this the happenings, holidays, and the heroes. So happenings might be something, the breach of the Continental Divide, and I think you've probably all seen that picture where you have all of the Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans standing there in the picture as the two railroad men are shaking hands across the Continental Divide. And then you've got your holidays, like Martin Luther King holiday, and so on and so forth. And then there's your heroes, like various guys. I can't think. Eli Whitney and the Cotton Gin. So you've got all of these different, just like, it's almost tokenism. It's almost like, oh, look, here's where we're including things. Doesn't necessarily influence the curriculum at all. A lot of times, the happenings, holidays, and heroes are going to be things where it's just kind of mentioned during the course of a class period. Number two is the additive approach, and this is mentioning alternative perspectives, but there's no real change in the curriculum. So that week before Thanksgiving, where your students really are not there and half of your students have already decided to go on vacation, well, that's when we talk about the Native American perspective of Thanksgiving. And of course, they brought the corn and the turkey and whatnot, which didn't really happen. But it's additive, it's put in there, but it's not really tested. It's not really a big part of the curriculum. There might be a bonus question or two on it. Level three is the transformation approach, and this is where we challenge the curriculum. An example of this is Columbus and mercenary pirates as a means of legal murder. So we talk about the conquistadors, but we don't really dig into what that means and what are the kind of moral and social implications for it. And the fact that the royalty and the intelligentsia during the time period in the 15th century knew what was happening. And then as time progressed, the pirates became these kind of mercenaries. And, the French would hire pirates to kill people who were British, and the British would hire pirates to kill the French. And, pirates on both sides were given pardons and accepted. I mean, you even have stories of pirates going back and forth between the French and the English. Um, at this, later period of time. So what's happening here? And, you know, sure, murder's wrong, but what's going on? What's going back and forth? And then finally, the fourth stage is the social action approach. This is where the students know enough about history and culture to actually do something. So maybe they're writing letters to senators, local representatives, government officials, community groups. Maybe they're holding informational sessions and talking about issues that deal with, you know, race and equity in that situation. So those are the four stages. In our online work today, we're going to have a critical discussion. My goal is to be online during class time, so 9:30 to 10:45. My goal is to be there and to be posting replies as you guys are commenting. As you're talking in the forum that's related to diversity, I want you to try and reference points from the chapter. I know that both chapters you were assigned to for this day are very, very laden with information and ideas. So I want you to try and reference and quote. If you're using the ebook or the Kindle book, just give us a location number so that we know approximately where you're looking at. There are two discussion forums for today. The first one that I want you to look at is the current events forum. And I've posted two articles there, one from you guys and one that kind of tangentially talks on issues that you guys have brought up. And the one that I've posted is on a phenomenon called Gamergate. And second, we'll discuss the ideas in this presentation. I'll be sending out an email about who is going to be presenting next Thursday. So be looking for that, and I look forward to reading all of the wonderful things that you guys have to post. Thanks.